Hey everyone, welcome to Wealth Redefined. I'm your host, Michael Reynolds, independent financial advisor, owner of Elevation Financial. Thanks for joining me as always today. Glad you're here. Today, we are going to talk about how to accurately calculate your monthly expenses. This may seem odd to some who are into budgeting like I am, because you probably know your monthly expenses, but many don't. Calculating your monthly expenses is actually not super easy for many. It's if we're not using a budgeting tool like my favorite, which is YNAB, which is short for You Need a Budget, or Mint, or something like that, it's not easy to get a clear snapshot of what you're spending on a monthly basis. So we're going to talk a little bit about one way I like to do this, and it's not as hard as you might think. It's actually fairly easy, involving online banking and spreadsheets. So don't let the word spreadsheets scare you away. It's actually fairly straightforward. So we're going to talk through this here just briefly. Shouldn't take too long. But first, let me talk about the why behind it. So when I work with someone in a financial planning engagement, one of the important numbers that we want to know, that I want to know, is your monthly spending. And in this case, spending is not just like the lump sum. That's actually fairly easy to get. In fact, most bank accounts online will say, hey, here's the monthly number going out. They'll tell you a big lump sum. Like, that's not hard to get with tools. But what's really important is the true expenses category. This is what it takes to operate your household before any kind of investing. For example, so investing would be things like your Roth IRA, taxable accounts, crypto investing, whatever you're doing that's outside of that. So we want to get kind of a baseline level of what your monthly expenses are, and it takes a little bit of kind of sorting and categorizing. So what I find to be a really useful way to do this is to find the average based on a period of time, and first gather the data from that, and then sort and categorize and fine tune a bit to get the true number. So again, if you're using like a tool like You Need a Budget or Mint or something, that's a little bit easier. But if, let's say you're not, let's say you're like a lot of people and you're just kind of, maybe doing reverse budgeting, you kind of like have your investing on autopilot and the rest is kind of what you spend, or you're not really paying close attention. A really good way to do this is first pick a time frame. I like 6 to 12 months. So I'm going to say, let's say 6 months in this example. You're going to go into your online banking, and you're going to go to the account that is your typical operating account. So whatever is coming in and out, the account that, paychecks go in, expenses go out, your everyday most widely used account, your main account. And you're going to download your account transactions for the last 6 months. So let's say, right now we're in July at the time of this podcast recording. So let's say you're going to look at the first half of 2022. You're going to basically download transactions from 1/1/2022 to 6/30/2022. So you're going to get a nice 6-month snapshot of transactions. You're going to download that into a CSV file. A CSV stands for comma separated variables. It's basically just a kind of a formatted text file that gives you all of the transactions separated by commas so that you can import that into a spreadsheet very easily. So you're going to download a CSV file of that 6-month history of transactions. Pretty much any online banking system will do this. If your bank doesn't allow this, you're probably operating with some very tiny bank or credit union that has like no technology. So it's pretty rare that you're not going to be able to download those transactions that way. So you'll download the transactions, and then you're going to import those into a spreadsheet. Now, don't get scared off. This is not super advanced, pivot tables or anything. This is basic using a spreadsheet to format stuff. So I'm a fan of Google Sheets. I like Google Sheets because it's all online. You can share it with people if you need to. It's just a nice way to store things. It just works really well. It's free. So I like Google Sheets, but you're welcome to use Excel. You're welcome to use Numbers on Mac, whatever you want. I'm going to use Google Sheets. So you're going to import the CSV into your spreadsheet tool. I'm just going to say Google Sheets, but again, if you're using Excel, just use Excel. That's fine. So I'm going to import that, open it up in Google Sheets. Now what I'm left with is this 6-month history of transactions. It's going to say things like, debit or credit, date, description, amount, type. It'll have those kinds of columns. I'm then going to take that first column. I'm going to maybe bold it and freeze it and make it a header row so it stays persistent. If that doesn't mean anything to you, don't worry. Don't worry. Just skip that part. But in general, it's helpful when formatting to take that first row where it has the descriptions of the column headers and make that a frozen row so it stays there the whole time, or make it a header row, is sometimes what it's called. That way you can scroll down, up and down on the transactions and the header row stays where it is. So you can see what every column means. Then you're going to do some sorting. So if we're purely looking for expenses, which is what I'm looking for in this scenario, I want to take out everything that is not an expense. Everything that is a credit to the account, I want to take out. I only want to see things flowing out of the account. So I'm going to sort by basically ascending or descending, doesn't really matter, but I'm going to sort the amount column by that number. And it's going to give me an ordered list of the amounts from lowest to highest, or highest to lowest, depending on how you sort it. So you can very easily scroll until you find the point where outflows become inflows, or vice versa. And then you're going to select all of the inflows and just select that big chunk and delete them all. What that does is that leaves you with only the outflows. So pretty straightforward. Now all you have left is money going out of your account. These are going to be your expenses going out. Next, I'm going to take out all of the stuff that is discretionary investing, things that are not required to operate my household, but they are things coming out. And I want to identify those things, and I want to remove them from the spreadsheet. So for example, Roth IRA contributions. Let's say you're maxing out your Roth IRA. Let's say you're under 50, so your max is $6,000 per year. So you're doing $500 per month into your Roth IRA. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to sort by description, and that gives me a nice alphabetized list of the transactions by description, by their names. So I can quickly scroll and find those Roth IRA contributions. So, let's say you're going into custodian XYZ. It's probably going to look like a transaction going out into custodian XYZ. So you sort, look for that custodian transaction, take all those out. Same thing with any kind of brokerage account investing, maybe crypto investing, anything going out that's discretionary investing. You want to take all that out. That gives you your general household expenses minus that discretionary investing. Next, you're going to go through and look for big, irregular, one-time things. So things like, vacations, for example. You're going to take that out. Things like really irregular expenses that are unexpected, that rarely happen, you're going to take those out. Basically, anything that's not like a regular monthly expense, you're going to take those out as well. So this, as you go through this exercise, you're going to be left with the kind of the bare minimum operating expenses for operating your household. Now, why do we take out things like investments and irregular stuff? Well, because you want to get a baseline of what it takes to operate your household without the additional stuff. And the stuff includes the category like unexpected irregular expenses, things like, travel that is irregular, things like investing that is not required to operate your household. All that stuff we can account for in different ways. But what we take out, or the reason we take that stuff out, is because we want to be left with just the operating expenses. So once you're done with that, you're going to be left with things like utility bills, mortgage payment, groceries, everyday stuff, even buying, school supplies, random clothes here and there, eating out, entertainment, stuff like that. Stuff that's just the general everyday stuff. So once you're left with that, then you have a nice cleaned up spreadsheet that is the last 6 months, or a 6-month snapshot, containing only the stuff that is general everyday stuff to operate your household. Then you do a simple formula. Don't get scared off by the word formula. The formula is very simple. You're going to look at the column for amount, and then you're going to go to the bottom of that, and in the cell at the bottom of that column, you're going to do a simple calculation. And generally, for pretty much all spreadsheet tools, the calculation is going to be equal sign, and then the word sum, S-U-M, and then open parenthesis, and then the first cell of the amount column, and then a colon, and then the last cell of the amount column, and then a in parenthesis. Hit return, and that'll give you a sum of that entire column. So again, equal, sum, open parenthesis, first cell, colon, last cell, close parenthesis. Hit return, that gives you the sum. So for example, if your amount column is column D and the first row is the header column, then the first cell of that amount column is going to be D2. Let's say you have 365 transactions. You're going to have D2 is the first column or the first cell, and then D365, or in this case 366, would be the last cell. So those are the cells you're going to use for that range. So if you've never done a calculation like that in a spreadsheet, message me or look it up, and you'll see it written out as well. So if you get stuck, just let me know. It's a very simple calculation, though. It gives you the sum. So you're going to get a lump sum. It's going to be a negative number because these are all negative transactions because they're outflows. So that's fine. You'll get a negative number. Then take that number, divide it by the number of months you're doing. So if you're looking at 6 months, take that negative number, divide it by 6, and that number you get is your average monthly expenses going out. That's it. That's your average number. That's the number we want to use for planning purposes in general. There's a lot of ways you can kind of slice and dice stuff, but when I'm doing planning, what we want to do is first establish a baseline of what your monthly expenses are, because then you get a really good handle on what your math really looks like as a household. Then we do things like, okay, monthly expenses is this, income is this. First of all, do we have a deficit or a surplus? We want to have a surplus. So let's say you're making, X per year in income after taxes, then your income is kind of set as a specific net number after taxes. That's your cash flow. That expense number on average should be less than that. That means you have a surplus. That means you're spending less than you're bringing in. That's a good thing. That's what we want. So that is your baseline. Then once you have that surplus, then you get to see what to do with that surplus. For example, then let's go ahead and add back investing. Do we have room to do a Roth IRA contribution? Well, yes, we do, maybe. Do we have room for travel? Now, this gets into a case where this kind of segues into some other processes I've talked about before, which is for large irregular expenses. I'm a big fan of having a separate savings account for those things and bucketing money into those accounts on a regular basis. So I won't get too deep into that, but this is a great example of keeping cash flow consistent by putting a certain amount of money every month into a travel account or your short-term savings for your emergency fund or whatever account it might be. And then you pay those irregular expenses out of those other buckets of money. That way your cash flow stays consistent and you don't get interrupted, or your budget doesn't get blown up by these irregular expenses hitting your main cash flow. We want to try to keep cash flow as level as possible and as predictable as possible. So again, I won't go down the rabbit hole on those things because I've talked about them before and I'll probably talk about them again, but bucketing your money for larger regular expenses is a great way to keep cash flow consistent, because then you just save a consistent amount every month into those accounts and then use them as necessary for bigger irregular expenses. So that is how you would get your baseline number for average household expenses. 12 months is also a great time period. 6 to 12 months is usually what I would go for. 6 months is generally accurate. So again, steps are first, download a CSV of your transactions, take out the inflows so you're left with only outflows, go through and take out the discretionary things like investing, like irregular expenses that can be bucketed separately, and that's leaving you with what it takes on average to operate your household at your current lifestyle. And that number is very powerful to know. That number is extremely important to know, because once you know that number, you can then start to make plans based on that cash flow number. So it's a good exercise to go through if you're not sure how much you're spending, if you're not sure how much it takes to operate your household. That number is important to know. It's a very important number for financial planning in general. So it's a great exercise to do. It takes literally like 15, 20 minutes. It doesn't take very long, and it's a great eye-opening exercise. A nice side effect of this is that you'll start to see transactions that make you think like, oh, wow, I'm spending a lot of money on XYZ. Now, if it's something that enriches your life, yeah, spend the money. This is no judgment. But if it's something where it's like, you know what, I'm spending money on this gym membership that costs me $50 a month. I never go because I work out at home now. I should cancel that. It's a great way to illustrate and demonstrate some things you may not be paying attention to. Maybe you have, 5 streaming services, but you never watch, Amazon, or you never watch Hulu or whatever. You can look at that and say, you know what, I'm spending $15 a month on Hulu. We never watch it. We always watch Netflix or something else. We can cancel that. So this exercise is meant to give you average expenses, but it also has a side effect of helping you trim down expenses you weren't paying attention to. Because as you look through the transactions, you'll start to see things that maybe you didn't notice before. So it has a nice side effect of reducing expenses also. So one note here on this, I don't use credit cards. I know I'm a total weirdo. Everyone thinks I'm insane. I don't use credit cards, haven't for years. So this is really easy if you're like me and don't use credit cards, because it's just simple transactions. You can see what everything goes to. The descriptions are clear. You see what every transaction is for. If you use credit cards, though, the bulk of your transactions are probably going to be payment to, whatever credit card company, MasterCard, whatever bank you're paying. That's fine. That's not going to be a huge deal. It's going to restrict some visibility into specific transactions. But in general, we can't do a Roth IRA on a credit card, for example. So that's going to be fairly easy to split that stuff out still. Now with travel, that's a bigger one, because a lot of times we do put travel on credit cards and then pay it off, and you're not going to see that visibility. So you're going to have to figure it out based on your system. So you could say, hey, I'm going to count my credit card payments as outflow, but then I'm going to go back and look at my 6 months of statements on my credit card, pull out the travel from that, subtract that from the big lump sum number, and then do my division. That's fine. That works just fine. It's an extra step, but it will still get you where you want to go. So keep that in mind if you use credit cards. You're going to have that extra step potentially if you want to have really accurate information with those irregular expenses coming out of credit cards. So again, the expense number for what it takes to operate your household, very important number. That's a baseline number that helps you make really good decisions from a planning standpoint, and that's how you would get it. So as always, if you have questions about this, happy to talk through it. I help my clients a lot with this kind of stuff. I'm actually working on a few transactions like this with clients and helping them, sort through what their expenses really are, so we can determine things like, hey, should we pay off debt, or should we consolidate, or should we refinance, and what's the schedule for paying off debt, and a lot of times that number is a great starting point to calculate those decisions. So as always, you can find me at elevationfinancial.com. Feel free to book a meeting online if you want to chat, ask any questions you want. Thanks for joining today. Have a great day. See you next time.